Winter in Green Bay. White snow blankets, Lambeau Field. The breath of tens of thousands mingling with the silver-gray sky. From the stands, chants of "Favre! Favre!" echo like the heartbeat of America. They cheer for the man who turned Sundays into sacred rituals, for the legend who redefined the NFL's spirit of toughness. Brett Favre, born in impoverished Mississippi, became the heart of Green Bay, the soul of the Packers, the symbol of Midwestern faith. He was the first quarterback in history to reach 70,000 passing yards, 500 touchdowns, 6,000 completed passes, defeating all 32 NFL teams. He won 3 consecutive MVP awards, a feat no one has repeated. He brought home a Super Bowl title, capturing millions of hearts not with perfect technique, but with unrelenting spirit. For 321 consecutive games, he took the field with a broken finger, a torn shoulder, a aching back, still smiling, still throwing, still making America believe no pain was too great to stop a burning heart. Iron Man of the NFL, that's the title they gave him. But then the cheers faded. The spotlight gave way to a quiet room, where hands that once threw like a storm now trembled holding a glass of water. His body, ravaged by thousands of collisions, began to crumble. Mornings came with struggles to remember where he'd placed his keys. Doctors said the concussions from years past were stealing his memory day by day. Yet Favre still rose each morning, still did physical therapy, still smiled at his wife and kids. He didn't surrender. He knew records would fade, but resilience endured. Today, with the glory gone, Brett Favre no longer plays for America, he's fighting for his own soul. This isn't a story of victory, but of its cost. If he ever made you believe in Sundays, leave a symbol as a tribute to the man who bled to keep that dream alive. Kiln, Mississippi, where red dirt roads blend with the smell of mud and sweat, where the sun burns skin and rainy seasons drag on endlessly. In a small house on the edge of town, a blond, scrawny boy threw a ball into an old metal bucket until his hands bled. That was Brett. At an age when other kids sought praise, he learned that in his home, love wasn't given with hugs, but with commands. His father, Irvin Favre, a high school football coach, was a man whose voice could silence a field. He loved his son in the tough Southern way. You don't cry. Men fight. Each time Brett fell, his father just watched, eyes cold as if daring him. Get up or leave the field. And Brett always got up. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he feared disappointing his father. At school, Brett wasn't a standout student. He learned slowly, preferred the woods to classrooms, the ball to books. But on the dirt field behind their house, that boy found the one thing that made his father look at him for more than 3 seconds: the football. Even in thunderstorms, he went out, feet caked in mud, throwing until his shoulder went numb. With every pass, he imagined his father's gaze softening, that maybe this time he'd say, "I'm proud of you." But those words never came. His mother, Bonita, was kind and gentle, but in that small house, her voice was like faint smoke. She avoided arguments, even when Brett was scolded, only pouring more tea and praying for peace. Brett loved his mother, but he learned early that she was weak, and his father was never weak. So he chose to be like his father. He swallowed tears, hid fear, and believed the only acceptable strength was the kind that never fell. In a home with no room for weakness, you don't learn to say, "I'm hurt." You learn to stay silent. And Brett became a child of silence. He played in rain, in storms, under his father's stern gaze, with a cheap helmet and worn-out gloves. Every missed throw drew a sigh from his father. Every perfect throw earned a fleeting glance, the only reward for his effort. Once, after a hard fall, Brett broke his nose. Blood streamed. He trembled, wanting to cry. But his father just walked over, picked up the ball, tossed it back, and said, "Do it again." The boy bit his lip, threw again, blood staining his shirt, not daring to wipe it. In Mississippi, tears were a luxury. Every kid had to learn to stand up, and Brett learned faster than anyone. Years later, at high school practices with his father, he'd stand quietly on the sidelines, Watching his father's players run, shout, laugh, he wanted to join, to play, to be seen by his father. But when his father turned away, Brett only picked up the ball, handed it back, and waited. A kid born on a football field, yet never seen as a player, just the coach's son. The feeling of never enough clung to him like a long shadow through his youth. And that was the start of an obsession to be recognized, remembered, loved. At 16, Brett began throwing farther, harder, fiercer than anyone. He didn't play to win, he played so his father wouldn't be disappointed. Every pass was a plea. Asterisk, Dad, look at me. Asterisk. At night, Brett sat on the wooden porch steps, listening to crickets, to his father's cough in the house, and vowed, I'll be somebody, so Dad can never turn away. Mississippi taught him strength, but stole something vital, the right to be weak. That boy grew up craving love, but only knew how to love through fighting. Years later, America would call him Iron Man. But inside, he was still that kiln boy, the kid not allowed to cry. He learned to rise after every fall, but never, in all his life, learned how to heal. Brett left Mississippi in 1991, carrying an old suitcase and dreams bigger than his youth. The Atlanta Falcons picked him in the second round of the NFL draft. But to them, he was just a name on a list, a reckless Southern kid who threw like he was firing a gun, lacking control, lacking discipline. At practice, he sat in the back row, laughing off the dismissive looks. He knew they didn't believe he'd last in a league of iron warriors. That first season, Favre played just 2 games, threw 4 passes, and got intercepted twice. No one remembered him. No one said his name. But in his heart, he promised, one day, they'll have to see me. September 1992, fate called his name. The Falcons traded Favre to the Green Bay Packers, a small, frigid team in icy Wisconsin where football wasn't just sport but religion. He arrived at Lambeau Field in an old jacket, messy hair, a face no one recognized. But weeks later, when starting quarterback Don Majkowski got injured, Favre was thrown into the game. That moment was like a rebirth. His first pass hit the ground. The second was intercepted, but the third a long throw cutting through cold wind, landing in Kittrick Taylor's hands in the end zone, set Wisconsin ablaze. The crowd leapt up, screaming, crying, hugging. At 23, the boy from Kiln, Mississippi, made a snow-white city burn with hope. From that moment, America had a new name, Brett Favre. He played like every game was his last chance to live, throwing without calculation, running into danger instead of dodging it. He never wanted to leave the field, not with cracked bones, dizzy head, or dislocated fingers. They called him gunslinger, the reckless Southern shooter. But to him, it was the only way to survive. He didn't play for contracts or titles, he played to avoid returning to Mississippi as a failure in his father's eyes. In the mid-1990 seconds, America watched Brett Favre turn the NFL into a stage for courage. In 1995, he won his first MVP. The next year, another. The year after, a third, 3 straight, a feat no one had touched. Super Bowl XXIZ 1997. He hoisted the Lombardi Trophy, raised his number 4 inches, a shower of confetti, crying amid a sea of fans. At Lambeau Field, they chanted his name like a prayer. In a nation divided by politics, storms, and wars, Favre became the one thing that made the country cheer together. They loved his wildness, loved how he threw like his heart might explode if he stopped. But behind the glory were long nights. In the locker room, after teammates left, he sat alone, hands wrapped in tape, wrists swollen, shoulders bruised. Painkillers lined up, whiskey helped him sleep. Each morning, he woke to stabbing pain but stepped onto the field, still smiling, still slapping teammates' backs. To Brett, pain wasn't a reason to rest, it was proof he was alive. When doctors told him to sit out for weeks, he'd say, "Resting betrays my father's spirit," and he'd play another game, then another, until America believed he was immortal. Yet no one knew each throw cost him another piece of his body. The prettier the pass, the steeper the price. Every hit left his head spinning, ears ringing, eyes blurred, but he told no one, just smiled and said, "I'm fine." Amid the applause, the million-dollar contracts, the fan photos, a truth hid. He was no longer Brett Favre, the carefree Mississippi kid, but a god burning out on the altar of fame. In 1997, after the Super Bowl win, he stepped off the field in golden light, hugging his helmet, smiling. Behind that smile, whiskey and pills were already his companions. He played like a man running from himself. The world hailed the Iron Man, but inside, another voice echoed. Even steel feels pain. He just wouldn't let himself admit it. Because if he weakened, if he stopped fighting, everything would collapse: the image of his father, the city of Green Bay, America, and the belief he'd built with his own blood and bones. Each night, when the stadium lights dimmed, Brett sat staring at the white tape on his hands. The smell of blood mixed with medical tape, victory laced with whiskey. He wondered if his body could take another hit tomorrow. But the next morning, when the whistle blew, he stood there, number 4, unyielding smile, stepping into the storm like he was the wind itself. They called him Iron Man, but in silence, he knew even steel feels pain. In 2003, fate tested Brett Favre once more. On December 21, in the bitter Wisconsin winter, a call from Mississippi pierced the night. Irvin Favre, his father, his mentor, the shadow of his childhood, had collapsed behind the wheel from a heart attack, leaving no final words. Brett heard the news in silence. He sat motionless, the phone slipping from his hand. The man who taught him not to cry was gone, and suddenly, all he'd done, every victory, every record, every glory, felt meaningless. He wanted to fly back immediately. But the next day, the Packers faced the Raiders on Monday Night Football. The team told him he could sit out. No one dared ask him to play. But Favre quietly said, "My dad would want me to play." And he played. Under Oakland's nightlights, America held its breath. Someone said they'd never seen that look in Brett's eyes, not the eyes of an athlete, but of a son grappling with unnameable pain. From the first throw, the crowd knew this wasn't a game, it was a farewell. Favre threw for 399 yards, 4 touchdowns, shattering every limit. Each pass was a stifled cry, a prayer sent to a father no longer in the stands. As teammates rushed to embrace him, as fans stood to applaud, Favre looked to the sky and smiled. America wept with him. It wasn't just one of the greatest games the NFL had ever seen, it was a funeral held with heart. But when the stadium lights dimmed, when the cheers faded, Brett collapsed in the locker room. He buried his face, sobbing like a child. For the first time in his life, not needing to be strong, he whispered, "I played the greatest game of my life for someone who'll never see it." It was the only victory that felt like defeat. Trophies, fame, applause, all hollow without his father there to witness. In the months that followed, Brett returned to Mississippi, sitting for hours by the old wooden chair on the porch, staring at his father's dusty boots left in the garage. His father had promised to attend all his big games, but now those boots stood still, a reminder. Time waits for no one. He no longer heard the command, "Do it again," or felt that stern gaze, and in that moment, Brett realized how much he needed it. He felt hollow. He drank to forget, then to sleep, then because he didn't know what else to do. When liquor wasn't enough, he turned to pills, painkillers, sedatives, anything to numb the loss. He still took the field, still smiled, still pretended to be immortal. But inside, he was breaking. Twice he entered rehab. Once for painkillers, once for alcohol. Both times the headlines read, "Favre conquers addiction." But the truth was, there was no conquest. He only traded one addiction for another. The need to be loved, to be cheered, to fill the void his father left with the roar of the crowd. In a later interview, his voice hoarse, Favre said, "I played to forget. I drank to forget. But when I forgot, I felt emptier. America's hero, the Iron Man, became a prisoner of the legend he'd built. He wasn't allowed to be weak, to fall, but in the mornings, staring in the mirror, he no longer saw a warrior's eyes, but those of a lost son searching for his father in his own reflection. Each time he took the field, he glanced at the stands as if hoping to see that familiar figure in the crowd. But there was only emptiness. That winter in Kiln was colder than ever. Favre sat on the porch, hearing the wind whistle through the pines, the smell of smoke drifting from a neighbor's house. In his hand was an old photo father and son on a grassy field, the father with arms crossed, stern, the son beaming. He whispered, "I did it, Dad," but the reply was silence. In that silence, Brett grasped what he'd never allowed himself to understand, that some pains can't be thrown away like a football. Some losses can't be overcome by will. He'd fought his whole life to make his father proud, and in the end, when his father was gone, he realized he'd never learned to live without him. From then on, every game Brett played carried a quiet sorrow. Each throw was still beautiful, still strong, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. He no longer threw to conquer, but to keep a promise to someone no longer there. His family said sometimes they'd see him sitting alone, staring into the distance, lips moving as if talking to his father. Once Deanna stepped onto the porch and saw him gazing at the old boots in the garage. She asked, "Why do you keep them?" Favre softly replied, "Because if I let them go, I'm afraid I'll really forget him." The man taught to be strong finally learned to fall. But in that fall was something achingly beautiful: love. The love of a son for a father gone, a love that needed no victories, no fame. And that love, though late, taught Brett Favre the lesson his father never had, that sometimes, to be a real man, you first have to let yourself be weak. But the darkness didn't end with his father's loss. After leaving the field, Brett Favre thought he'd find peace, live in the glow of old glories, enjoy mornings free from the pain of playing. But life didn't let him rest. When the stadium lights went out, the media's lights flared not to illuminate glory, but to expose sins. The first scandal broke in 2010, when reports alleged he'd sent inappropriate messages while with the New York Jets. The story spread like a southern summer fire. From a family man, a Midwestern moral icon, Favre became late-night TV fodder, social media mockery, barroom gossip. They no longer spoke of his miraculous throws, but of leaked texts. He stayed silent. No explanations, no defenses. He knew in this era, apologies saved no one, and silence only fueled more hate. And then, before that wound could heal, another storm hit. In 2020, Brett Favre's name flooded headlines again. Not for football, but for money. He was dragged into an investigation of misused welfare funds in his home state of Mississippi. Headlines screamed, "Favre tied to embezzled welfare funds. Packers legend took money meant for the poor." The words cut like knives, slashing the honor he'd built over 30 years. Favre denied wrongdoing, said he didn't know the money's source, that he'd repaid over $1 million, that his conscience was clear. But the public didn't want truth, they wanted a scapegoat. From a city's savior, he became a symbol of greed, of the hypocrisy America once adored. Media swarmed his Hattiesburg, Mississippi home. Cameras flashed outside his gate. Every TV click showed his face not in Packers green, but in investigative reports under Brett Favre accused. Captions. The father smiling with his son was replaced by the image of a man under financial scrutiny. Fans who once wore number 4 Packers hats fell silent. Stores that displayed his jerseys began taking them down. The crowds that once chanted his name now sneered, "Even heroes are just pretenders." One night, Favre sat in his living room, the TV screen reflecting his weary face. He couldn't recall the last time he slept well. His phone buzzed endlessly. Lawyers, reporters, old teammates. He saw his life torn apart under the camera's glare. He was used to being knocked down on the field, but this fall had no turf, no teammates, no referee. Only silence and shame. Out there, the nation doubted him. In the house, There was only Deanna. Deanna, the woman he'd loved since she was a high school girl in Kiln, who'd battled breast cancer while he fought painkiller addiction, who forgave mistakes the public never forgot. As the world condemned, she held his hand. She said softly, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, "I believe in you." 4 words, but to Brett, they were his only lifeline. He looked at his wife, who'd shaved her head during chemo, who'd stayed through his rehab stints, who'd walked through fire with him. While the world saw a villain, she saw the man she chose. The contrast was cruel. Outside, a storm of public scorn. Inside, a flickering lamp in a southern home. Brett felt smaller than ever. No longer the Iron Man. No longer an immortal idol. Just a man learning to rise from the ashes of his reputation. Once again, he turned to the old lesson not to cry, not to fall. But this time, he wasn't the kiln boy trying to make his father proud. He was a 56-year-old man, wanting only to hold on to the last shred of faith from the woman beside him. Each morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, he saw Deanna making coffee. She still smiled, and in that smile, he found what the world had forgotten: compassion. As lawyers read new accusations, as headlines branded him a fallen icon, he quietly held her hand. No need for words, no need for explanations, just the sound of her heartbeat. Fame, the thing he'd traded, blood, bones, and memory for, dissolved like smoke. But in those ashes, one thing remained: love. A quiet love, without fanfare or praise, only trust. Amid the world's jeers, only one woman's heartbeat kept him anchored. After all, when public opinion grew weary, when newspapers stopped mentioning his name, Brett Favre thought the final storm had passed. But it turned out, the real storms didn't come from out there. They quietly began in his mind. One morning in early 2024, Favre got out of bed and realized his legs weren't obeying anymore. His body was stiff like a board, every movement heavy, knees aching like rusted hinges. When he bent to tie his shoelaces, his hands trembled violently, the laces slipping from his fingers several times. He sat staring at it, bewildered, then let out a dry laugh, but that smile faded when he suddenly forgot where he was going. He looked around the familiar room in Hattiesburg and felt it strange, as if someone had swapped everything out. His eyes searched for the Packers hat hanging on the wall, then lingered there for a long time. For a moment, he couldn't remember why it mattered so much. A month later, doctors confirmed what Brett had always feared: Parkinson's disease. The illness seated in his brain by decades of collisions, thousands of head hits. Irreversible neurological damage, they said softly, but each word weighed like stone. The man who once read hundreds of plays on the field, memorized every route, every defensive face, now had to stick reminder notes all over the house. Take meds at 8 a.m. Call Deanna. Don't forget keys. He hid some notes so his wife wouldn't see, afraid she'd worry. But Deanna knew everything. She saw him standing in the kitchen, looking around like he was lost in his own home. She walked over, put her hand on his shoulder, and he smiled a trembling smile. "I'm just looking for my coffee mug." Every morning, Favre had to spend over half an hour for his body to agree to move. Neck stiff, shoulders aching, hands contracting. The fingers that once gripped the ball like iron now shook uncontrollably. He told an old friend that every night he heard ringing in his ears, like the crowd's roar still echoing in his head, but not cheers, but impact. Every hit from years ago, every fall to the ground, now returned in his sleep like slaps. Some mornings, he stepped into the backyard, saw the ball on a chair, picked it up, tried to throw, but his hand slipped. The ball fell to the grass. He stared at it for a long time, then softly said, "My hands don't listen anymore, Deanna." She didn't reply, just bent down to pick up the ball, placed it in his hand, and held those trembling hands. They stood still, in silence. Under Mississippi's golden Sunday, Brett didn't cry, but his eyes were wet. He said softly, voice shaking, "I'm afraid, one day, I won't recognize you." She squeezed his hand tighter. then I'll be the one to recognize you first. The disease progressed slowly but ruthlessly. Sometimes in the middle of a conversation, Brett would stop midway, forgetting what he was saying. Once while laughing with a friend, he suddenly went quiet, face blank, then apologized for forgetting their name. He tried to hide the panic, but at night, when Deanna was asleep, he quietly sat on the porch, looking up at the sky. In the moonlight, his hands shook like leaves, and he wondered, will I even remember her face tomorrow? Doctors said the damaged brain areas had expanded. The neural pathways that once let him make split-second decisions amid dozens charging at him now betrayed him even in small things. Buttoning a shirt, opening a jar, reading a text. The man who once controlled an entire game with a sharp mind now sat puzzled before his own phone numbers. Yet, there was one thing he didn't lose: willpower. Favre still went to the small field in Kiln every weekend, teaching kids to throw. They cheered, "Coach Brett!" and he smiled. His voice trembled, eyes blurred, but he still told them stories about the 399-yard throw, the snowy night in Green Bay, about never giving up. One day, midway through, he paused, silent for seconds. A boy asked, "Did you forget?" He smiled kindly. "I'm just trying to remember how many times I've taught that." Then he threw again, the ball slow, but straight like a remnant memory of his glory days. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the gradual loss of himself. Favre felt every bit of memory being erased. Some days he remembered everything, victories, teammates, even his father's face, but the next day it all blurred. One afternoon, when Deanna handed him an old photo from after Super Bowl 31, he touched it, whispering, "Who's this man that looks so familiar?" She didn't reply, just leaned her head on his shoulder. The price of glory was now measured in the time left in his mind. The injuries no longer just lay on his body, they took over memories, day by day. Doctors said, "You have to accept it, Brett. There's no reversing it." He just nodded. Deep down, he knew this was the final game, with no overtime. But even as memory betrayed him, Favre kept one ritual he never forgot. Every morning, seeing Deanna make coffee, he'd say, "Do you know I love you?" She'd smile, "I know." He'd reply, voice hoarse, "Good, because if one day I forget everything, I still want you to remember that." The man who once threw for America now could only throw pieces of his own memories into the void. And America, the country that once cheered under the lights, could only stand and watch, quietly, as their legend trembled in the dawn light, still trying to smile, still trying to stand, because that's the only thing he knew how to do his whole life. But Brett Favre wasn't the type to surrender. He'd lived through the most brutal physical pains, through the media's scornful eyes, through nights when memory betrayed him, and he was still here. When doctors said, "You should rest, accept it," Favre just gave a faint smile. "I never knew how to rest." Every morning, he still got up at 6, bracing against the bed frame, forcing himself to stand like a ritual of existence. His body was stiff like rusted steel, taking nearly half an hour to straighten his back. But he didn't complain of pain. He walked around the house, did physical therapy in silence, each movement trembling, slow, but full of determination. He quit pills, quit alcohol, ate strictly, low salt, lots of veggies, cut caffeine completely. For a man who once lived on adrenaline and cigarettes, it was a new battle, a battle to survive one more day, to remember one more memory. Favre no longer wanted to prove anything to the world, just to live decently with what life remained. He started a fund to help poor kids in Mississippi, where he grew up with empty hands. He raised money to fight brain injuries for young players, visited high schools to talk about the truth behind the NFL's glamour. Don't let those hits take your future like they took mine. He went with former players to recovery centers, sat for hours listening to big men break down crying over depression. "We all thought we were superhuman," he said, "until we couldn't remember our own names." Oh, Deanna stayed by his side, as she had for 3 decades. Together they built a support center for women post-cancer, where Deanna shared her own story, and Brett quietly sat in the back row, eyes wet. He always said, "She's stronger than me." When asked what kept him going, Favre replied slowly, "Because I still see Deanna's eyes every morning. I know I'm still here, still loved, and that's enough." End of Prend of. The other day, at a charity autograph session, his hand shook so much he couldn't hold the pen. Fans lined up, mostly those who grew up with Favre's image in Lambeau's snowstorms. A little girl approached, handing an old poster, voice trembling. "Uncle, you're still my hero." Favre smiled, scrawled his signature, ink smudging. He said, voice choked with emotion, "Don't pity me. I'm still alive, and still grateful." The whole hall fell silent. The man before them no longer wore a Packers jersey, no longer had the strength to throw, but in those trembling eyes they saw resilience not of an athlete, but of a man who wouldn't let go. That evening, Deanna drove him home. On the road, Favre looked out the window, where the sun set over golden southern fields. He softly said, "You know, I once thought my life ended when I couldn't play anymore. But now I see, turns out, waking up each morning, still seeing you, still breathing, still thanking others, that's the real victory." The small house in Hattiesburg now hung full of family photos instead of trophies. On the wooden shelf were pictures of 3 generations, his father, him, and his grandson. He told the little grandson about the years gone by not to boast, but to warn. Play for joy, not for fame. Remember what you love. Don't let people love you and then leave you behind. When the boy asked, "Do you remember the day you won the Super Bowl, Grandpa?" Favre smiled. "Yes, but I remember clearer the day Grandma beat cancer." Occasionally, he still went to the local field, standing watching kids throw under the afternoon sundae. One day, a boy asked, "Want to try throwing, Uncle?" Favre nodded, picked up the ball. Hand shaking, but he threw. The pass flew slow, not strong but straight, light, landing neatly in the kid's arms. Applause rang out. He smiled. In that moment, people saw the old look again, the look of the Mississippi boy who once made America cheer. Brett Favre understood he was no longer the Iron Man. The steel had rusted, memory blurred, body betrayed. But willpower, the thing born from kiln's mud, from his father's stern gaze, from falls and risings, remained intact. He didn't need a stadium, didn't need crowds, just each morning to open his eyes, see Deanna, and thank life for one more day to live. He no longer threw to win, but to prove that, even when shattered, a man can still rise. Now at 56, Brett Favre lives quietly in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where the whispering pines seem to recount his life story. His body aches when the weather turns cold. Trembling hands make tying shoes a challenge. His eyes, dimming, and memory, flickering, sometimes take minutes just to recall what day it is. But when he hears kids laughing on the grassy field behind the house, his eyes light up. Their laughter, the sound of throws, the clash on the turf, summons the soul of that Mississippi boy who once believed that as long as the ball flew, pain could be left behind. Favre sits on the porch, an old green Packers sweater dusted by time, his smile gentler, slower. "I don't need more records," he says. "I just want to remember enough to recognize my wife's smile each morning." End of praise. His life now fits in simple things. The hot coffee Deanna brews, sunsets over the meadows, the radio replaying that Super Bowl game. When the announcer's voice rings out, "Favre throws! Touchdown Green Bay!" He closes his eyes, sinking into memory. In his mind, a montage of his life plays the blazing lights of Super Bowl 31. His father's face in the stands, stern eyes fading into snow, the roaring cheers at Lambeau Field, then the quiet sobs in the locker room after burying his father. Deanna's smile through chemotherapy, her hand gripping his through sickness. And now, kids running on the grass, shouting his name. Each image is a piece of life, each piece a scar, each scar a story of love, faith, and the cost of greatness. Favre gave America legendary Sundays, days when people forgot divisions, united in cheers under white snow. But now, in the silence of his later years, perhaps it's time America remembers that behind the legend is a flesh and blood man who paid with his youth, health, and memory. The voice softens, light as a breath. He gave America legendary Sundays, and in return, America owes him more than applause. Sometimes at night, Favre sits on the porch, hands trembling, holding a glass of lemonade. Deanna sits beside him. She joins him, resting her head on his shoulder. They say nothing. They just look out, where sunset gilds the old pines. Some silences need no words, for love speaks instead. Favre smiles, shakily sips, not spilling. In those eyes, the spark of the boy who made America believe in miracles still glints. If Brett Favre ever made you believe courage is real, leave a symbol as thanks. Don't just remember the hero who scored. Remember the man learning to hold a glass without dropping it. For in those tremors is a lifetime of resilience of a Mississippi son, a father, a husband, a legend who lived, fell, loved, and still tries to stand. Because in those tremors is America fragile, flawed, but still rising, as he did. Brett Favre is a story America is both proud of and pained to face. We cheered him in Lambeau Field's blizzards, saw him throw 399 yards and 4 touchdowns a day after his father, Irvin Favre, died suddenly of a heart attack. We called that moment great. But now, looking back, we must ask, what was the cost of that greatness and who paid it for us? A man taught as a boy that you don't cry, men fight, raised in Kiln, Mississippi, where love came as commands, not hugs. A boy who played with a broken nose, blood streaming, still hearing his father yell, "Do it again!" A player scoffed at by the Falcons, picked up by Green Bay as a backup, then becoming Wisconsin's savior. A symbol of Midwest toughness, 3 consecutive MVPs, a Lombardi trophy, 321 straight games, playing with broken fingers, torn shoulders, dazed head, and still smiling so no one saw his pain. Then, when the stadium lights dimmed, nights of whiskey to sleep, pills to stand, 2 rehab stints, and still saying honestly, I played to forget, I drank to forget, and when I forgot, I felt emptier. We hailed his immortality, but that immortality is slowly killing him. For today, 5-6-year-old Brett Favre wakes with a body stiff as wood, with Parkinson's, with hands shaking just to tie his shoes. The man who read hundreds of plays now fumbles with his own phone number. And his greatest fear isn't the disease, but the day he won't recognize Deanna, the wife who held his hand through cancer, scandals, public attacks, and whispered, I believe in you. At this point, we're no longer talking about football. We're talking about collective morality. We, as American culture, have a habit of loving heroes when they're invincible and abandoning them when they weaken. We cheer devastating hits on the field, then act shocked when those hits decay their brains by 50. We demand they play through pain, keep going, be tough, then watch them do physical therapy just to hold a glass steady. The lesson isn't just for players, it's for all of us. Parents teach boys, don't cry, but those boys grow into men who don't know how to ask for help until it's too late. America teaches men their worth lies in not falling, then wonders why they die quietly. Brett Favre, with all his glory, scars, and crumbling body and memory, shows us what we often lack the courage to face. True strength isn't never falling. True strength is daring to live on, love on, soften, sign autographs with trembling hands and still say, don't pity me, I'm still living and grateful. This is his legacy, and perhaps our debt to him and those like him is to learn to be grateful before it's too late. If Brett Favre's story makes you feel the power of resilience and love rising above pain, please subscribe and leave a comment as a tribute to this legend. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video, where other brave hearts of America continue to tell their stories.